Appearing on Eternia once every 20 years from the Nether, Point Dread is a mysterious place of power that can either aid the heroic in their defense of the planet, or provide the evil with immense power. Second only to Castle Grayskull itself in mystery and power, the magical structure seems to have, more often than not, come under the influence of Skeletor to aid him in his quest for power. Will he take control again? Let's find out. Hi everyone, I'm Mac, and this is Mega Construx, Masters of the Universe, Panthor at Point Dread.
By the power of Grayskull!
Arguably one of the most anticipated sets of the Masters of the Universe line, Point Dread has its history firmly entrenched in the mini-comics, with the Talon Fighter only appearing in one episode of the Filmation series, where it basically took on the role of a glorified Wind Raider with nothing special about it. Our first look at Point Dread came in the issue The Tale of Teela, which we covered in a previous episode, but the short version is that 20 years prior to the first issue, He-Man and the Power Sword, Skeletor had control of Point Dread and used its power to create a magical duplicate, a clone, of the goddess in the form of Teela. Now, 20 years later, with Point Dread returned and Teela a woman, Skeletor planned to use both to gain entrance and dominance over Castle Grayskull. Skeletor's plan almost succeeds, but when the goddess merges with Teela and reaches her full power, she throws the demon from the castle and affixes Point Dread to Castle Grayskull's tallest tower, along with the Talon Fighter. The next time we see Point Dread and the Talon Fighter is the issue titled The Power of Point Dread. The issue begins with Skeletor gaining magical control of the Talon Fighter itself and piloting it to physically rip Point Dread off the top of the castle and carry it in its talons in flight. He drops the small fortification at the doorstep of Castle Eternia, and with the combined might of Point Dread, the Talon Fighter, and his army of evil beastmen, he almost succeeds in taking the royal palace. It is only through the combined efforts of He-Man and the Wind Raider and an armored Zor that they are able to bring Skeletor down, causing him to nosedive and crash into Point Dread itself. At the end of the issue, we see the impact ejected Skeletor from the Talon Fighter, and Point Dread is placed back where it belongs atop the tower of Castle Grayskull. Interestingly enough, this is the last time we see Point Dread in the mini-comics. The next issue starts a new continuity of sorts, with He-Man having the alter ego of Prince Adam, and the storytelling veering into the direction of the Filmation series. In fact, the few times we see Castle Grayskull in the mini-comics after this, Point Dread is nowhere to be seen. We do have an appearance of the Talon Fighter at least one time in the issue titled Leech, the Master of Power Suction Unleashed. In it, He-Man pilots the Talon Fighter to do battle with a King Kong-sized Hordak, and defeats him by ramming the fighter into the giant, defeating Hordak, and completely wrecking the Talon Fighter itself. In this issue, the Talon Fighter is barely mentioned, and there doesn't seem to be anything mystical or magical about the craft. It's just a jet fighter with laser guns. Mega Construx gives us a fairly well-rendered representation of this iconic set from the vintage line. Point Dread itself is constructed with the same sand-green colored bricks that were used to build Castle Grayskull itself, which will become important in a moment, with a fairly rough-looking exterior that has that built-out-of-a-mountainside look the design typically has. On the right side, we even have a series of small steps built into the rock that is a callback to the vintage toy that gives the heroes access to the Talon Fighter landing atop the structure. Looking around back, we see that there is an interior to Point Dread, but in all honesty, it's not that big. And with the swiveling computer positioned where it is, there isn't much room to do anything inside anyway. The computer build has a lot of really well-done printed pieces with the control panels, and I especially love the monitor that shows the view of outer space. It reminds me a lot of the computer monitor within Grayskull itself. As stated before, the computer is on a swivel piece, so turning it around we see 3 yellow clips, and while the set doesn't specifically say what these are supposed to be, I have seen it theorized that they are used to hold the weapons of the Talon Fighter's pilot. Spinning the computer to the side, we have a great little Easter egg in the form of this element that resembles an old vinyl record. This is an obvious nod to the vintage toy that came with an audiobook on record, but we'll talk about that more later. The build of Point Dread also comes with these 3 columns that you place on the floor of Castle Grayskull's tower, and then these pieces attached to the bottom of Point Dread itself and allow you to join the 2 structures together, just like in the vintage set and the comics. And while every incarnation of Point Dread and Castle Grayskull have allowed the 2 pieces to be joined together, I feel this is the most properly proportioned models we've received so far, size-wise. Oftentimes, the Talon Fighter looks huge atop the castle, and looks like it should crush the tower under it. The Mega Construx version of the tower looks like the Talon Fighter could believably land on the tower without dominating the visual of it. The Talon Fighter gives the set some color with a bright and well-built model. The Talon Fighter not only looks great, but it is also constructed of a few unique pieces to this set, things like the radar dish atop the fighter, the engine cones at the rear, and the flip-up canopy piece itself. In the cockpit of the Talon Fighter, we have 2 more printed pieces to either side of the pilot's seat, displaying control panels. Though the Talon Fighter is smaller than the Wind Raider, it is capable of carrying 2 micro-action figures. Mounted to either side of the cockpit, the Talon Fighter is armed with 2 dart launchers that actually have a decent amount of power and range behind them. In the audiobook, the Talon Fighter was described as something that could travel through both time and space, implying that it has time-traveling capabilities. When I was a kid, I also liked to imagine the Talon Fighter was capable of spaceflight as well. With the studs on Point Dread's perch and the anti-studs on the bottom of the Talon Fighter's feet, the plane is able to lock in and land securely. The minifigures we get with this set are a bit of a mixed bag, and I wonder what the motivation was to pack in the figures that we received with it. I like them. I don't think there's anything wrong with them. It's just a curious collection with really only one making sense to me. First, we're going to look at the one that shares the name of the set, and that is Panthor. Now, Panthor throughout the series didn't get much love from the writers. In fact, I don't think he ever appeared in the mini-comics, and only appeared in a handful of episodes of the Filmation series. I think he appeared more often in the DC Comics series than anywhere else, and in those books, I seem to remember Evil Lyn having more of an affinity to the Great Purple Cat than Skeletor himself. The Mega Construx incarnation of Panthor is basically a repainted version of Battle Cat, and there's nothing wrong with that, as pretty much every incarnation of Panthor in toy form has been a repainted Battle Cat. Panthor is a rich purple in color, a solid color with no stripes, and he comes with an aqua green colored armor with a saddle for Skeletor, or Evil Lyn, to ride him. Unlike the vintage toy, Panthor also comes with a helmet. I feel this is a nod to the 2000X version of Panthor, since that one had a helmet whereas the original did not. The 2000X helmet, though, had ram's horns curling out from it, looking like the head of Skeletor's Havoc staff, and this is just a recolored version of Battle Cat's own. Still, I do like that they added a helmet for Panthor this time around. Unlike the original toy from the 80s, this version of Panthor is not flocked, instead being a solid, smooth plastic piece. There is a flocked version of Panthor that is out now, but we'll take a look at that later. Panthor has articulation that is the same as Battle Cat, with ball joints at the hips and shoulders, a swiveling tail, a ball joint on the front ankles as well as the head, and a fairly generous neck hinge. And what would Panthor be without his master in the saddle? Arguably, 2 of the most popular variants of He-Man and Skeletor from the vintage line were the first variants, and those were their battle armor incarnations. And just as we got Battle Armor He-Man with Battle Cat, so too do we get Battle Armor Skeletor with Panthor. And what a figure he is. First off, I love the paint application on Skeletor's skull, predominantly yellow with the burning red eyes and green highlights giving it some depth and detail. The stylized bat symbol on his chest really looks great. Brightly painted, it just stands out, really pops against the dark purple and black armor he's wearing. This figure looks great, and I am especially excited to have him since I missed out on him when I was a kid and never had him in my vintage collection. For an accessory, Skeletor doesn't come with his power sword or Havoc staff, instead he comes with a purple version of the battle axe. This is an interesting choice since he never used this in the mini-comics. In fact, I don't think he even used it in the DC comic book runs either. Instead, he used this a handful of times in the Filmation series and was even able to use the sphere at the top of the axe head as a crystal ball and used it for remote viewing. Also with this set, we get our second issuing of the Sorceress from Castle Grayskull. This version of her is dressed in completely white clothing, and she wields a white staff as well. This is commonly referred to as the Temple of Darkness Sorceress, because in a mini-comic of the same name, she is seen wearing an all-white costume just this once, so lo and behold, she became a variant. This isn't the first time we've seen this variant of her, though. I believe she first appeared in the Masters of the Universe Classics line, and most recently, she has been released with the Castle Grayskull in the Masters of the Universe Origins line by Mattel. Other than her coloring, this is the same figure we received with the Mega Construx release of Castle Grayskull. Along with the white-clothed Sorceress, we were also given an all-white molding of the Falcon Zor as well, seated on top of a very basic bird perch. And finally, that brings us to Zodak, the Cosmic Enforcer. Zodak was a very unique figure in the vintage line. He was the only non-villain at the time to have the demon feet like Skeletor and Merman. He was the only figure that had truly sci-fi style armor and helmet, and he was the only character of the original line that came with a laser pistol instead of a sword or an axe or a melee weapon of some type. All in all, he was very futuristic compared to the rest of the characters. Zodak never received a proper purpose or backstory for most of the run of the Masters of the Universe. In fact, he never made an appearance in the original minicomics, only appearing in the audiobook that came with the vintage Point Dread and Talon Fighter set. His place in the Masters of the Universe mythos is further muddled by his original cardback packaging labeling him as the evil cosmic enforcer, and the art on the back showed him fighting the heroic warriors. It wasn't until the DC Comics run that Zodak is used in any fashion and is portrayed as a being who watched over the conflict of good versus evil and maintained the balance between the two sides, making him a neutral party to the conflict. It is also interesting to note that in the DC Comics, Zodak soared the spaceways on a flying throne that greatly resembles the throne from the vintage Castle Grayskull. The micro-action figure of Zodak is a great representation of this character and looks just as kit-bashed as his original figure did. With Beastman's body, Skeletor's demon arms and feet, but with the coloring of a white man, and a completely new and fantastic head sculpt, Zodak truly stands out among the Masters of the Universe line. Like I said, the head sculpt for Zodak is wholly unique to this figure, and mine looks flawless in its design and paint application. As with the original figure, Zodak comes with a laser pistol for an accessory, something that was unique with the original line, but not so much anymore. Like all sets for the Masters of the Universe Mega Construx collection, they give us these sand green pieces to use as stands for each of the micro-action figures, including one large plate to use for Panthor. And our final accessory we get is a weapons rack that is basically a recoloring of the same weapons rack we received with Castle Grayskull, complete with all the same weapons, this time molded in blue. When I first put this set together, I originally thought the Talon Fighter was too small, especially when compared to the Wind Raider. But when I went back and looked at the mini-comics, and especially the audiobook that came with the original 80s playset, I realized that the Talon Fighter is portrayed as a more compact machine. I assume a higher level of technology on Eternia allows for miniaturization in its design. Point Dread, however, I do think is too small. In other versions, Point Dread has been built of two pieces, a base and the upper section that would detach and clip onto the Tower of Grayskull. This power basically just gives us the top half of Point Dread without having a base to attach it to when not connected to the castle. This is not a deal breaker for me, just a little disappointing. Needless to say though, if you are a collector of Mega Construx Masters of the Universe and you have Castle Grayskull, Panthor at Point Dread is a definite must-have for your collection. In addition to this video, I also uploaded a recording of the original audiobook that came with the vintage Point Dread set for you to watch and listen to. There's a link and card available and I hope you enjoy it. There will be more Masters of the Universe coming down the line, friends, with the Battle Ram and the Skeletor heads to take a look at. So until then, play well everyone, stay safe, stay healthy, and as always, thank you for watching.